There's a proposed map of the different roadways that have either a shoulder or there's one potential off-road trail that we were able to work with the advisory committee to locate. So what you're seeing here are places where we're talking about shared lanes, which is mostly the downtown area, a few roads that don't have shoulders, which may be later phase additions, and other places where we do have shoulders where we can make those safe for biking. Moving to bicycle parking, and as I mentioned, an ordinance is useful because you want to be able to show locations and quantity design, the things that you want to see in bike racks. Again, cyclists, if the rack isn't substantial or familiar, sometimes they'll ignore it completely. You don't want to spend money on something that nobody's going to use. So we have provided in the document different choices. One of the things which you see shown is one of your town staff found some... Ed Dow. Ed Dow. He created a design. He used, I believe, scrap metal to assemble it, and really has done a first-rate job on a really nice structure. We would probably look to reduce the height maybe overall on future models, because if you're placing them on a sidewalk, you don't want it to be too big an impediment to pedestrians or to block windows, but it's great. One other town has seen it and would love to see something like that for their own town. So you're to be commended that this gentleman took the initiative on his own to do this.
Make sure he patents that.
In fact, when we talk about the bike rack program, a lot of times the town will work with local businesses that want to install bike racks, and there'll be some sort of contribution or shared cost. Your Mr. Dow, is it? Mm-hmm. Ed Dow. If Ed Dow is considering to continue making these, you could actually, that could be the town's contribution to the business to actually supply the rack and then have them pay for the cost of installation. And basically it would ensure that you get these kind of nice racks all over the town. Just something to consider. Other things to look at for parking is links to transit. You want to have bus stops where you want to have bike racks where you have bus stops. So most of the buses that, all the buses that DART runs, the Route 65 buses, have bike racks on them. That accepts 2 bikes. I know that the Cecil County Transit is working to have bike racks installed on their buses, but you still only have 2 racks per bus. And we found in Delaware that a lot of times those 2 racks are full, and people come up to a bus stop with a bike and have nowhere to secure the bike. So you want to make sure you provide bike racks at bus stops. Signage is important, as I said, so people can find the parking, otherwise it's of no use. And the creative design you've already got covered, which is great. So these are some proposed locations for bike parking. We're targeting schools, shopping areas, municipal buildings, and just really your shopping area downtown, because you really do, it'd be nice to encourage people to ride their bikes downtown, especially if they have a short distance. So these are just, again, a proposed map. For transit, we kind of covered that, making sure that there's access, and you've got opportunities. Cecil County has worked on a transit development plan and some potential route expansion, so we just like to make sure that when they review bus stop locations, especially within Elkton, that they know that they should be looking for bike rack location at that same place. This last bullet point is about the Elkton transit-oriented development and the train to Main. The proposed train station will be in this area. It's an easy bike ride to Main Street from there, so you want to make sure that the streetscape encourages bikes, and that there are bike lanes and shared lane signs where necessary, where you can put them in. Heather's going to go into a little more detail on that. Also part of this plan, there's a new bike route that has been added to mirror some transit. When we get down to enforcement, we're talking about making sure that the police officers are all aware of the bike rules and laws. There's a state program to do so, and we're pretty sure that the town's police force can work with the state for any training that they do need. But you do already have bike officers, and we're sure they're pretty competent. We've had them at most of our meetings, and it's been really good to have a police presence in a meeting where you're talking about the bike plan, so that we get their input. When we look at targeting unsafe behavior for drivers, that's enforcement, but it also goes back to education, which we'll talk about. But it also helps for the police. They can have a friendly presence out there by participating in bike rodeos and things like that, where you're doing some training for kids and adults. We would look at high crash bike corridors. Right now, we've had a little trouble collecting data, basically from the state, specific to bike crashes. And there isn't a lot of bike use, so there may be very few bike crashes. What we will do, and when we talk about evaluation, is try to track that better. But this is a key thing to be working on.
Just one thing, like, go back to a minute.
Sure.
Just now on the path there, like the bicycle design, we do this, who's responsible for doing all that? I mean, probably if it's on the state highway, I'm sure it'd be state, would they not?
It would. The state,
And then,
the state would handle any state highway road. The town would be responsible if we were putting in bike lanes. In our case, we'd be looking more at shoulders. These are called sharrows. They're an indication that this is a bike-only facility. What you could also do on shared lanes is where you have slower traffic and low traffic volumes. You indicate that this is a lane that bikes and cars would share. You position this, actually use a different signal, a different symbol that doesn't have a cyclist on it, because a lot of cyclists are sensitive to the fact that you don't want cars running over a symbol that has actually cyclist on it. So it's basically just a bicycle signal or symbol on the sharrow. So it's slightly different street marking depending on if you're talking about a bike lane or a shared lane. But yes, the state actually has a program to look to use to implement sharrows as well. So when we talk about education, everybody thinks of kids and making sure they're educated to use bikes, and that is important because you want them to be comfortable where you've provided lanes for them. Having bikes ride with cars with children on them is maybe not everybody's first choice. So the education part is very important. But it's also for adults, because a lot of adults haven't ridden bikes, and when they get onto it, they need to know what the rules of the road are and how a bike should be on the roads and how they're expected to maneuver. A lot of drivers, there's sort of a pushback from drivers who see cyclists that are operating illegally. So you don't want to have that create another conflict. But this is just a way to make sure that everybody understands what's expected when you're on a bike on the road. And we would like to see the town work through the Parks and Rec. I think there is actually some interest in starting a bike club in Elkton, and that group could also be very instrumental in helping to educate people.
With your education program, how will you target groups of people about your plan of riding a bike on the road? I know you can go through Parks and Rec, I know you can do this, but is there a general scope that you may have in order to educate people?
I think one of the things we like to see is when you have town festivals and groups gathering, use those opportunities to push the idea that the town wants to be more bike friendly. You see a lot of activities. Again, having bike clubs, having the bike patrol, having some people with experience as part of that organizing those activities is just great, because most of them are eager to do that and to pass on the good information and make sure people are riding legally. So that's one way to do it. When we talk about this, there's this particular word, cyclovia. That's something that was developed in basically I think is South America, but it also but the bottom line is what they do is they close parts of town to cars. And so towns would have, certain streets or the downtown would be bike or walk only. It's just kind of like a little festival that you can have every week where it would just be catering to bikes. It's just an idea that's out there, and it's been done in some U.S. cities are starting to do parts of their town for that kind of thing. Sometimes it's a Sunday only or a Saturday. It really depends.
Yeah.
Just some ideas on outreach and education. It really does work also with statewide health initiatives, because with the more and more attention paid to fitness, a lifestyle that involves bicycling and more pedestrian activities is it's much healthier. When we talk about bicycle-oriented development, there are towns that have actually seen growth along corridors that are heavily used by cyclists, businesses that cater just to them. Portland's a really good example of that, and we've got some information that we can bring. There's already some in the plan, but was something we can also keep an eye on as more and more towns do it. Really, it's just getting out to the community, and WMAPCO will help. If this plan is adopted, make sure that we go to different civic groups, come back again for festivals and things to make sure that everybody understands what's going on and what the town's trying to do. One of the keys, and we haven't shown it so much on here, is to have an active bicycle advisory committee. What you have now is a project team that had worked on this plan. What we found in other places is if you have a dedicated committee that has some town staff on it, and usually on the town staff there's one or two people who are already a little bit interested in cycling anyway, they can really carry things forward. There are costs involved, but the idea would be you need someone who's championing the bike plan. Otherwise, it just kind of sits. If WMAPCO presents you with a bike plan, but we're not part of the town, things may not move forward. In 2 years, you can be right where you are and haven't actually had someone to help move things along. So having a bicycle advisory committee is a really strong thing. And if the commissioners appoint one, people get a little kind of a charge out of being appointed by the commissioners to help do something for the town. So when we get to implementation, that's one of the recommended actions. And we do have, the handout that we gave you has a list of recommendations. Because of the time, there's about 2.5 pages of recommendations. We won't go through them all now, but what we will say is, even if you're willing to endorse the plan tonight, you still have time to get back to us with any comments that you have about the recommendations. What we did was we looked at our goals, we looked at strategies to achieve those goals, and then specific actions that were needed for each goal. And that's how it's organized, so it's a little easier to follow what we're asking you. The bottom line is what we'd love to see is for any comments that you have. So we distributed this document about a month ago in a draft format. Again, when we sent it to you for this meeting, we also sent it to the advisory committee again and back to the state so they could be looking at it. And so we haven't received any comments past the first wave, so we're pretty happy with the way things have turned out, and we're pretty happy with the representation that you've had at your advisory committee. We do think you should be looking at potential funding partnerships. There are some funds out there that can help with some of the improvements that you need to make. And also with your employers. Some of the major employers around town may have employees who already are into cycling, and some of those you can be working with them to try to find ways to implement not so much maybe the road work, but definitely with your bike racks and things like that for parking. So we mentioned evaluation. We have to have measures for each goal. I mean, as one of the goals of a WMAPCO plan is to make sure that it actually does something. So if we implement this plan, we're looking at things that we can measure to see what's changed. As we said, right now there's very low bike usage. So one of the things we would do is do bike counts. We would do them probably in the spring. There's actually a national bike count day where different towns all send people out to do it. We would do those counts this year, and then as we implement things, we would come back every year and count to see if we're getting more and more riders. Also looking at programs that were formed, partnerships, number of bike clubs, and the increase in bike use. So the next steps, we had a public workshop here on the 1st. It was not well turned out. It was very cold and it had rained all day long. So unfortunately we didn't get as many people as we'd hoped. We have taken the draft recommendations to the public, as I mentioned, and we'd like to finalize the draft document, which we feel it's pretty final, but we want to take into account any comments that the commissioners have before we say that it's final. So what we'd like to see is for the commissioners and the mayor to adopt the plan or endorse the plan. And if that is done, then what we will do, we actually have a technical advisory committee tomorrow that Jean Minner will be attending, as she always does. And we will present that, and we'll present the plan to them tomorrow, but also if we've got recommendation or comments from the mayor and commissioners, we will present them as well. And if everyone approves it, then it would go to our council after the town has approved it or endorsed it. So that's my presentation for tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions, anything I haven't covered. I would like to address Commissioner Piner. We did look about scooters, because at the last presentation you asked some questions about motor scooters. Motor scooters technically can operate in a bike lane, although they are considered a motor vehicle. So they're governed by the rules of a motor vehicle, but they are permitted in bike lanes. And I guess if you can fit it into a bike rack, you could probably use the bike rack too.